Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from in the world. We are so grateful that you are here today with us to learn about modernization. I'm joined here with some amazing experts. I can't wait to bring them on. We're going to learn all about modernizing your .NET, ASP.NET, WinForms, and WPF applications all the way up to .NET 6, so we can get you running in the best way possible. I'm going to go ahead and bring on my first expert, Mike.
Hello.
Hey, Mike. How's it
Hi,
going?
Jamie. Doing well. How are you?
I'm great.
Excellent.
So tell me about modernization. Why is it important? Why is it like a really big topic right now? And why is it a really big deal because of .NET 6?
Yeah, so uh, .NET 6, of course, is the latest .NET release. It's a long-term support release, so it's one that users can confidently target for the next few years. And it represents the future of .NET. And so folks who have existing .NET framework applications may want to look at .NET 6 as a thing they want to target because this is where all the future investment's going. I think .NET Framework still supported. It's still a great product to use if that's where you are. But if you want to get the latest language features, the latest runtime features, you need to get on the .NET Core train, which has now .NET 6 as its current long-term support release.
Amazing. Yes, so you heard it. It's important. It's all about .NET 6 right now, and so we really want to get you all updated to the latest so that we can get you all on board with the train, the .NET 6 train. So Mike, do you have a PowerPoint for us, or do you want to jump straight into?
We
Yes,
can do it
there we go.
either way. We can do the slides. That'll work.
Perfect. Great.
All right. So yeah, the thing I wanted to talk about today was, I guess we'll go back for a minute, the new Microsoft Learn module that we have that covers how to modernize an ASP.NET application built with ASP.NET MVC or Web API on .NET Framework and upgrade it to use ASP.NET Core instead. This is some new learning content we have that's for folks unfamiliar with the upgrade process to just walk through the basics of how you can use our upgrade assistant tool to help with that upgrade and what sorts of things you need to think about as you're going through it. And actually, if we could switch to my desktop, just so I can show the Learn module so people know where to find it online. If you go out to the Microsoft Learn site, we have this Modernize ASP.NET Framework to Core module, which is brand new. And this is what we're going to be walking through today. So I'm just going to go through this with everyone watching. If you guys want to follow along, you can go out to this site and we're just going to go through the content directly and just sort of talk about why these things are important, things to look out for, stuff like that. I do have some slides because I just find trying to scroll up and down and do all of this in the browser doesn't present quite as well. But what I've got in the slides is exactly the same content that you're going to find in the Learn module on the website. So why don't we switch back now and we'll sort of run through it. So one of the first things you'll find is we do have sort of some prerequisites that you need to have installed in order to go through this content. And that's going to be the .NET SDK, which is necessary for building .NET 6 applications, as well as an installation of Visual Studio 2019 or 2022. It's important to have Visual Studio because when we're using the Upgrade Assistant tool, it has to be able to build your existing application as part of upgrading it. And so you need to have all of the stuff installed that you would need to build your app. And for an ASP.NET application, that's going to be at a minimum Visual Studio. And then we mentioned the command line because Upgrade Assistant is a command line tool. And so you have to be sort of comfortable doing that. And I know it can be a little bit intimidating, but we'll walk through it and you'll find out that actually it's really easy. All right, so one of the first things we cover here is just sort of the learning objectives. This is the things we're looking to get out of this Learn module. And it's all about understanding why you'd want to modernize your application and then how to go about it. And I do want to clarify that when we talk about modernizing a .NET app, there's a lot of different things that could mean. Modernizing might mean getting it cloud ready. Modernize might mean revisiting the solution's architecture to think about making it more service oriented. Or modernizing could mean upgrading to the latest version of .NET. And it's that third one that we're really focusing on today. The other items are interesting and important, but these are all sort of independent ways of modernizing you can think about. And for your specific scenario, you may want to do one, two, or all three of those sorts of modernization exercises. But what we're looking at today is all about taking your app where it is, upgrading it to .NET 6. So let's move on. All right. So just before we dive into the Learn module, this is the agenda of what we're going to be going over today. So I'm going to spend the next half hour or so walking through the ASP.NET Learn module, and then we're going to have Andy DeGeorge, who's going to come on and talk about what things you need to think about when you're upgrading a Windows desktop application. He's going to walk us through a WPF app upgrade, so you can sort of see that experience. And then we'll close with some Q&A at the end. All right. So let's see. I think if I'm remembering right, yeah, we can just go through these like so. As you're walking through this Learn module, one of the first units we have here is understanding the benefits of modernizing to ASP.NET Core. So as you think about upgrading, you're going to want to ask yourself, well, why should I even bother? When you're upgrading an ASP.NET app, it's a non-trivial amount of work. A simple app may take you, you know, a few hours or a day to upgrade. A complex app could be weeks of work to upgrade. Why is it worth it? So we've called out here a lot of different cool new features you're going to get access to. And if you go through the Learn module, we've actually got a link in the module out to documentation that explains even a fuller list. But I think some of the big ones that are really interesting to people upgrading are, you know, performance, cross-platform support, and access to the latest language features and ecosystem improvements. So just walking through those briefly. ASP.NET Core performance has been shown to be very fast, a big step up over classic ASP.NET. And so if you have an application that's very performance critical that you want to run as fast as possible, get the greatest throughput, it's a good idea to invest in upgrading to ASP.NET Core running on .NET 6, because the ceiling there for what sort of throughput you can have is a lot higher. I do always describe it as the ceiling being higher because I do sometimes work with customers who will upgrade to ASP.NET Core and don't initially see a big performance difference. And that's because there are things in their application that are artificially bottlenecking the throughput. So you do have to expect that after the upgrade, you may need to take some time profiling, looking at your app, and making sure that you have all of the best practices in place to really take advantage of the high performance potential of ASP.NET Core. A common one I see is that people will sometimes accidentally block asynchronous tasks, and ASP.NET Core performance depends very much on being highly asynchronous. So you want to look for things like that. You want to be careful that you're not allocating a bunch of large objects unnecessarily and doing a bunch of extra GC work. There's a whole host of things that could be slowing your app down, but the point I want to make here is that after you've sort of done that tuning, the performance you can get out of ASP.NET Core is significantly higher than what you would have previously gotten out of ASP.NET running on .NET Framework. So that's a good reason to look at upgrading. Another one that we see, and this is big, is the cross-platform support. So ASP.NET Core can run on Windows, Linux, Mac, and so it allows you a lot of flexibility in how you're going to deploy your application. For a lot of customers I've worked with, their enterprise will already have other web assets running in a Linux environment, and there's benefit to the business to being able to run everything in that same environment. So by upgrading to ASP.NET Core, you can take your ASP.NET apps and run them in that same Linux server, in that same cloud environment that's Linux based or whatever it is, as the other apps that you're running. You also, if you move cross-platform, there's sometimes opportunities for cost savings. So the flexibility to run either on Windows, Linux, or if in a development environment, even develop on a Mac, is really a nice benefit of ASP.NET Core that you don't get with classic ASP.NET. We also call out, if you're going through the Learn module, you'll see if you keep scrolling down that the next one that this unit identifies is microservice. Now, I do want to be clear that ASP.NET also can be containerized, running on .NET Framework, but it will run in a Windows container and it will be larger. So either ASP.NET or ASP.NET Core can run in a containerized environment, but ASP.NET Core was designed from the ground up to really target small, lightweight, containerized workloads. And so you're going to get the best experience if you're on ASP.NET Core. Um, and then finally, these last two kind of go together. We've got the ecosystem as well as access to new features in .NET. And what this is about is that going forward, all of the new innovation in .NET is going into .NET 6 and its successors. So for an app that's sort of in maintenance mode that isn't really receiving a lot of new work, maybe it doesn't matter as much whether you're targeting ASP.NET or ASP.NET Core. But for an app that's being actively developed, there's a lot of value in targeting ASP.NET Core because you're going to continue to get the latest language features. And when you look at the .NET ecosystem, if you go out to NuGet.org and look at all of the many NuGet packages you can use, over time, these packages are more and more going to be targeting .NET 6 and in the future .NET 7, and they may not have as much support for .NET Framework. So if you want to access the latest and greatest in the .NET ecosystem, you need to be on .NET 6. And the .NET features is sort of a similar thing. The new language features and so on, those will come to .NET 6, but not .NET Framework. Okay, so we've sort of walked through this first unit of the learning module, and so we are presented here with a knowledge check. It says, which is not a reason to modernize? First option is to run on a variety of platforms, including Linux, Mac OS, and Docker, in addition to Windows. We already talked about how that is absolutely a reason to modernize. It's one of the top reasons I see customers citing. So that's not what we want to pick here. Faster performance and better scalability. This is also a reason to modernize, which we talked about. ASP.NET Core has the potential for really high performance, world-class performance, and it does scale well because of its small size and its ability to spin up and down quickly. So the one we want to pick here is HTML5 and modern web standards. That is obviously something you're going to have with ASP.NET Core, but ASP.NET applications also adhere to modern web standards, can use HTML5 and so on. So if we go on to the next slide, that is the answer here. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next unit in this Learn module. So in this next unit, we're going to be talking about how you decide whether you should upgrade to ASP.NET Core, whether you should partially upgrade, or whether you should just sort of stay targeting ASP.NET and .NET Framework. And those are sort of the three options that this module, or that this unit outlines. So option one is just stay as is. And I do want to emphasize that for some applications, this could be the right decision because, like I mentioned earlier, upgrading to ASP.NET Core can be expensive in terms of time and investment, right? And so you need to make sure that the value you're getting is worth that investment. And the value is going to be that flexibility of how you deploy. It's going to be the higher performance. It's going to be access to new features. But if you have an application that's sort of just being maintained and not really actively improved, and it has sufficient performance and it runs in the environment you want it to run in, it's okay to stay on ASP.NET running on .NET Framework. .NET Framework is not going away. It's going to be supported indefinitely. It is a great option. It has been for years and it continues to be. There's nothing wrong with that. So for these apps that are sort of just doing what you need them to do, it's okay to leave them where they are. The other end of that spectrum, though, would be to completely upgrade, is to take the entire app up to ASP.NET Core. And this is where you realize all those benefits we were just talking about. For any sort of new development, this is absolutely the option you should choose. And even for applications that maybe are already deployed into production, if you're continuing to iterate and improve them, I would strongly consider this one. The third option, though, if you have a very large solution, is you can look at incrementally upgrading. And this is all about sort of moving towards the full upgrade, but doing it a little bit at a time. And there's two ways that we see this happen. If you're looking in the Learn module, it's got a link out to some documentation that talks about upgrading with vertical slices or horizontal slices. When they talk about vertical slices, they're talking about taking some portion of the application, one controller, one area, moving that to a new ASP.NET Core app while leaving the rest of the application still targeting ASP.NET and .NET Framework for the time being. And the advantage you get from that is in a very large solution, you could do some of the work and then deploy both your ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core apps and to have part of it running on ASP.NET Core without having to upgrade everything. So this can be nice, and you even can actually, if you need them to look like one app, you can use our YARP reverse proxy as a way to communicate between them. That's a more advanced scenario, but it's possible to sort of connect them. The challenges you're going to run into here is that you do have two separate applications. So if you have some sort of state in your application, if you have session state, if you have authentication, you need to think about how it's going to work to have two separate apps um, for different portions of the solution. Now, in some cases that works, and so that can be a good option. The other possibility is do this sort of horizontal slicing, which is about taking portions of your dependency graph, some of the libraries that are dependent on, upgrade them first to .NET Standard, and then sort of work your way up the dependency tree until eventually you upgrade your head ASP.NET project over to ASP.NET Core. And this is a useful way of slicing because you can take a large solution and do some of it here, some of it there, and still keep having a working ASP.NET solution that you can deploy to production as needed. Now, the challenge here is that you want to upgrade to .NET Standard whenever you can for these lower level libraries, because that allows them to work with your existing ASP.NET solution. And then when you retarget the head project to ASP.NET Core, they continue to work. And so you can sort of do that sort of incremental thing. If you have libraries that can't target .NET Standard, you can multi-target between .NET 6 and .NET Framework, and you can do it that way. But now you have some code differences between those two versions of the project, and it gets a little bit more complicated. The biggest challenge I see to this approach, which in general I recommend, is that if you have web dependencies throughout your solution in those lower level libraries, it becomes harder to slice them this way because the system.web namespace isn't present in ASP.NET Core. All of the same functionalities there, but the API surface is fairly different. And so it's difficult to horizontally slice a solution if you have dependencies on system.web throughout. So a good pre-step that you might want to consider is actually refactoring your code to keep all of your system.web dependencies in just a couple web-specific libraries and have most of your solution be have no dependency on web-specific things. Just have your business logic or whatever. Then it becomes very easy to upgrade those parts of the solution first while still targeting ASP.NET. And once all of those things are updated to .NET Standard or they're multi-targeting, then you can upgrade the head project more easily. All right, so those are our options. Let's move on here. We do also talk a little bit in the Learn module at the end of this unit about what I mentioned earlier, where upgrading and modernizing can also mean modernizing so that you're cloud ready or so that you're able to take more of a service-oriented approach to your architecture. If you go out and look at the Learn module, we have links to Microsoft offerings and documentation that can guide you through both of those sorts of modernizations, which you should look at and learn about. But for today's work, we're just gonna be focusing on .NET 6, so we're gonna move on from here. Okay, so before we let's see what's next here. Okay, so the next item, I'm not sure why we're up to a knowledge check. We're supposed to talk about what is Upgrade Assistant. So the next unit here, unit 4 out of 6 in this Learn module, is all about understanding what the .NET Upgrade Assistant is. So I'm going to summarize this for you because you can read through it on your own. But .NET Upgrade Assistant is a tool that the .NET team has created to help automate some of the changes you need to make when you're upgrading an application from targeting .NET Framework to targeting .NET 6. Now, for some scenarios, like web scenarios, ASP.NET, it's not going to completely upgrade, make all of the changes you need because some of the changes are large and depend on the specifics of the solution being upgraded. So it's not a silver bullet, but it's useful for helping walk you through the sorts of changes that are needed, helping you understand what has to happen, and making some of those changes automatically so that then you can focus on what's left when the tool finishes running. So let's go ahead and go over here and do our knowledge check. And I didn't go through everything in this unit. You can read through this later. But the question it asks us here is, which of the following is not a feature? So the first one says, updating authentication and authorization logic to use ASP.NET Core Identity. So if we read through this Learn module unit, you'll see that this is not one of the items listed. This is an example of the sort of complex change that you have to do sometimes going from ASP.NET to ASP.NET Core, the way you configure authentication and authorization. That's changed significantly. So this isn't something that Upgrade Assistant is going to automate. So this is going to be our answer. The other ones, when it talks about analyzing your application to see which features it uses that are not supported, Upgrade Assistant does give insight into that. And then scanning the NuGet packages in the application and determining which ones need updated or which ones aren't going to work is also something Upgrade Assistant does. So the answer here is going to be that first one. All right. So next we get to the really interesting part of this Learn module. So if you're following along, this is the part where it gets hands-on. So what we're going to do here is we are going to take a new project and we're going to show how to use Upgrade Assistant to begin the upgrade process and then some of the additional tweaks we have to make afterwards. So if we can switch to my screen, I'm going to walk through this. Okay, so here I am in Unit 5 for this Learn module, and we are going to do this exercise of upgrading an ASP.NET MVC app using Upgrade Assistant. Okay, so the first thing we need an application. So let's come over here into Visual Studio, and I'm going to create a new project. And it is going to be an ASP.NET web application targeting .NET Framework because that's the starting point for our upgrade. All right, we give it a name. I think let's see if I come over to the Learn module, they use the name ASP.NET MVC Test. So I'll do that as well. All right, that looks good. And for .NET Framework, you can choose really any of these. Upgrade Assistant will upgrade from any of these to ASP.NET Core. Starting around 4.6 or so, it's going to be a better experience because there are breaking changes if you were targeting .NET Framework 2, 3, 3.5. So there's a lot more differences. In fact, if you're targeting a very old version of .NET Framework, it may be worth upgrading to .NET Framework 4.8 first, just to deal with those breaks separately before you deal with them all at once. But if you're targeting something relatively new, you say 4.6 or above, the experience is not going to be very different. So any of those are fine. And we will create this. I'll choose MVC. I should point out that Upgrade Assistant does not support web forms because web forms is not present on .NET 6. But for Web API or MVC apps, it's going to work. So we'll do MVC. We'll create this project. So we're just going to have a new simple MVC project from the new project template. It's going to have a couple of pages we can navigate to, a couple of views. And this is what we will go ahead and run Upgrade Assistant on. Okay, here's our app. Let's go ahead and jump back to the module and see what the next thing we need to do is. Okay, we did that. Okay, so they recommend unloading the project to look at the source of the project. So let's go ahead and do that. And this says we can close Visual Studio. We don't actually have to close it. I'll just unload this project so we can sort of see what the CS proj looks like initially, and we'll go from there. So you can see here's the project file that I'm starting with. It's fairly large, even for a trivial MVC application. It's because we have to list all of our references, all of our content, our compiled items. So, this is a very typical project file, but okay, that's where we're starting. This is our starting point. So the next thing we need to do is we need to install the Upgrade Assistant. So Upgrade Assistant is a .NET SDK tool. So we install it using the .NET CLI. So this is going to install it from NuGet and then make it available because of the -G flag globally from your command prompt. So we are going to come over to my command prompt and we're going to run .NET tool install -G upgrade assistant. Now I already have the tool installed, so it tells me that if you didn't, this would install it. If you already have the tool installed, maybe you installed it a while ago, but you want to make sure you have the latest, you're going to run .NET tool update. And that's going to update the tool with the latest version available on NuGet.org. Okay, so we've got Upgrade Assistant installed. Now we need to run the tool. So we're going to run Upgrade Assistant upgrade is the command we want because you can either run the upgrade command or the analyze command. Analyze is a newer command that's meant to just give you a report of what changes are necessary without actually changing anything. But we're going to go ahead and actually upgrade this application. So we're going to run the upgrade command and then we just give the project to run on. Upgrade Assistant can run either on projects or solutions. So I'm going to need to go to I need to figure out where my project is first. So let's see, where are we here? All right, I'm going to copy the path. So I could run this on the solution, and if I had a solution with multiple projects in it, I would run it on the solution, because that would mean they would upgrade all of the projects. It would order them lowest dependency up to the top of the dependency graph, and it would walk me through all of them. In this case, there's only a single project, so running it at the solution level or the project level doesn't make any difference. Okay, so we're going to start up. And Upgrade Assistant is a command line interactive tool that sort of walks us through the changes that we need to make. Okay, so I'm gonna have to scroll a little bit because I've got this really zoomed in so you guys can see my font, but I'll just sort of scroll up and down as needed. So you can see here a list of the steps it's going to walk us through, and then we've got this little menu of commands we can pick from down at the bottom. So the first step is we're going to back up the project. So I'll choose one. And in fact, I don't actually have to type one because there's a shortcut in Upgrade Assistant. If you just push enter, it chooses the first item in the list. So we're going to apply the backup step, and we're going to back up to this recommended location. We could choose a custom place, but this seems fine. Backing up is important because remember, for a web solution, Upgrade Assistant will only make some of the changes needed to upgrade to ASP.NET Core and .NET 6. So that means that when we're done, the project will not build. It's expected that there's going to be some build errors because it will have retargeted us to .NET 6 and made some of the changes necessary, but we're going to have to go in and make the rest before we get back into a good building state. So if the tool is going to leave us broken, we want to make sure we have a backup in case we decide, hey, let's roll back for now. We want to get back to a working state. That's why it's important we back up. Okay, now the next thing we need to do is we need to update the project file to SDK style. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this. And this is taking us from that old verbose CS project to the new, much more human readable SDK style project that .NET 6 uses. Okay, you'll notice we do get a couple messages in here about, hey, we see you're using system.web and these sorts of conversions are a little bit harder, just warning us that there's going to be some fix up we have to do afterwards. But if we come back to Visual Studio, you'll see that we now have this significantly smaller and more readable CS project, which is nice. Okay. Next up, it wants to clean up our NuGet package references. So this is going to be, one of the things you'll see here is that we actually have these package references for our NuGet dependencies, and we no longer are going to have a packages config file because this is the new modern way of referencing NuGet dependencies. So we're going to apply this step, and what it does is when we moved our NuGet references over, we moved every NuGet dependency that this app was going to need. But when you're using package reference, you actually only need the top level dependencies reference that your app uses directly. Any NuGet dependencies that those dependencies transitively pull in will get restored automatically. So that step's just sort of cleaning up those ones that are no longer needed. So at this point, we haven't actually moved to .NET 6 yet, but in the next step, we're going to update TFM. TFM stands for Target Framework Moniker, and that's the .NET profile that we're building against. So right now you can see, if we look at our project file, our target framework is .NET Framework 461, okay? But after we apply this step, the tool has determined that based on the type of project this is, it's an MVC project, .NET 6 is appropriate. If this had been a class library, it would have tried to target .NET Standard if possible, because that would make it more portable. But in this case, it is .NET 6.0 now, okay? So next up, it's getting ready for the next step, which is a second round of NuGet package updates. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this one. The reason we do a second round is that now that we're targeting .NET 6 instead of .NET Framework, some of our NuGet packages might not work anymore. So this step tries to upgrade to newer versions of NuGet packages if it's able to, that will work with .NET 6. And if it finds NuGet packages that don't have newer versions that support .NET 6, it'll give a warning so we know to look at those manually. Okay. And by the way, if you're following along with the Learn module, everything I'm doing here is sort of called out one step at a time in the Learn module, but I'm not flipping back and forth to my browser because it's easier to just sort of talk through it. Okay. Next up, we need to add some template files. So this is going to be, for web scenarios specifically, there are some files that are expected to start up your ASP.NET app, like a program.cs, an app settings.json, that wouldn't be present in an ASP.NET Core application. So this step is going to add those so that they're available both as a starting point for when you're manually updating your project, you'll have a starting point to work with, and so that future steps in the upgrade assistant can go back to these files and change them based on what else we see in your ASP.NET app that might change how these are supposed to work. So we've added sort of these template files as a starting point. Okay. In this next step, we're going to be updating things based on your web.config. So you can see there's a few sub steps here. We're going to copy over application settings and connection strings from web.config to app settings.json. Now, you can still get app settings out of web.config. The configuration manager API is still present, so you can do that. But over time, you'll probably want to migrate to the new app settings.json file and use the Microsoft Extensions configuration config system, because that's the more modern and more flexible configuration option. You'll also see that a couple of these are marked as complete because Upgrade Assistant has looked at our project and determined that nothing needs to be done for these. We don't have any connection strings. We're not using any unsupported config sections that would need to be commented out, like a system.service model section or something like that. So those are already marked complete. So we'll just step through the non-complete sections. So now we've copied our app settings. And then also this 7D, this step is about taking any namespaces that were automatically imported into all your views in configuration and moving those namespaces over into a view imports.cshtml file, because that's the way in ASP.NET Core you automatically import things. All right, so I hit enter twice there on accident, so it automatically already applied this step. So let me just scroll up and show what we're doing. So the next two steps, steps 8 and 9, our last two steps, are about updating your source code. Step 8 is about updating C# code that's found in Razor files in your views. And in this case, that was already marked complete because the views in this project are very simple. They didn't have any C# that needed updated. They should work directly on ASP.NET Core. And then step 9 is about updating your C# files. And so this is about going through the CS files and looking for common code patterns that we know are going to need to change and making those changes automatically. There is a bug in Upgrade Assistant. This first one should be required. It's about removing using statements like using system.web that no longer make sense in ASP.NET Core. And there's a bug right now where this one isn't being applied. So we've got an issue open in the GitHub and we're going to get that fixed. But we do know to apply this one. This is about replacing types. Like if you were using System Web MVC controller, that no longer exists, but you can keep using your controllers by instead using Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC controller. And so this step replaces some of those types, and you can see where it was making replacements in home controller primarily to get this source file closer to what it needs to look like to run on ASP.NET Core. Okay, so that's all of the source changes we needed. There's not very many because this is a very small project. So we'll go on to the next step. And we do here get a warning that it has identified some source that needs changed that it can't do automatically. It's letting us know that our app is using some bundling and minifying APIs in bundleconfig.cs. And that whole system works differently in ASP.NET Core. So it's not able to automatically fix this, but it's letting us know we need to go look at this and fix it ourselves later. So, okay, so we've got that warning. And that's the last step. At this point, we move on to the next project. There is no other project in our solution. So we're done. The only thing we do is we do this step that says finalize upgrade, which is just about removing some temporary files on disk and cleaning up. So you could skip this and nothing bad would happen. But this just sort of does a little bit of cleanup. And then the tool is done. So let's come back over to our Learn module and pick up after that. Okay, so we applied all of these steps. So the only thing that's left here now is we're going to do a little bit of manual updates to fix the things that Upgrade Assistant didn't fix automatically. And that's what's sort of gone over down here. Okay, so if we come back to our Visual Studio, here's our updated CS proj. So I'm going to go ahead and reload this. And now it's going to load the new ASP.NET Core version. Okay. So looking at the Learn module, the first thing it says is that we can clean up some of these NuGet packages. So if we come back here and scroll down to our package references, we have some NuGet packages that are pulling in client-side dependencies, some client-side JavaScript and CSS. This made sense in ASP.NET, but in ASP.NET Core, you're not expected to install client-side dependencies as NuGet packages. Instead, you're going to install them from NPM or load them from a CDN or something like that, which is like a a more modern way of handling client-side dependencies. So we can actually get rid of all of these, and we can remove newtonsoft.json because the tool added this Newtonsoft JSON compat package for us, which includes it. So we remove all of those, and now we're done updating that file. Okay. The next thing we need to do is update our source files. And there's two types of fixes we need to make here. The first is we do have to make a small fix to home controller because of that bug I told you about in Upgrade Assistant, where it was supposed to remove these two using statements and it didn't because it needs fixed. So we're just gonna do that manually. Okay. So now our controller is ready to go. You can see that actually we replaced some things with Microsoft ASP.NET controller. Actually, this should be pulled out into a using statement. That's another thing we're going to get fixed in Upgrade Assistant. But the controller is ready to go now. So the only other thing we need to fix is we've got this app start folder, and this is where you're going to spend most of your time upgrading an ASP.NET app, is this sort of initial configuration. These things are all configured differently. They need to happen in the program.cs, or if you're using the older model, in the startup.cs file, okay? But for most of these, we can just delete them. Because our project is very simple and just using defaults, so we don't need this filter config that's essentially a no-op. Route config is configuring MVC routing, but it's just using the default conventional route, which is automatically set up. If we come look at our startup.cs file, our new file template has the exact same route registered in the ASP.NET Core way of doing things, so this one can go away. We also have global ASAX.cs, which is just registering those various configs. This is a very ASP.NET way of doing this. This is something that would have to get rewritten for core, so we remove it. If there was complex logic in here, we'd have to re-implement that in our program.cs or startup.cs file in an ASP.NET Core way. In our case, we don't need to because there's nothing really of substance there. And then the last thing we need to look at is this bundle config. So here we're bundling up these various JS and CSS files at runtime, but that's not really a best practice anymore. We don't want to do this bundling at runtime. We want to do this as part of just doing our build. So you would expect to use a tool like Webpack or Grunt or some sort of other industry standard bundle and minifier to do this work instead. And so we're going to get rid of bundle config. If you really do want to use a runtime bundler similar to the way this worked in ASP.NET, there's a community project called Web Optimizer. You can search for ASP.NET Core Web Optimizer that does something sort of similar if you really like that approach. But the best practice now is to handle your client-side assets separately using something like Webpack or Grunt or Gulp or any of those. In our case, though, we just remove that, and instead we're going to come into our view and look at our layout where we had these script and style commands that were pulling in that content. And instead, if we look over here, we can just load these files directly because there's really not very many of them. ASP.NET Core has a convention where it will, if you're using static file middleware, it will serve static files from the www root folder. So I'm going to make a www root folder, and this step of the learn module tells me to move my scripts folder in there and to move my content folder in there. And then the learn module says that we want to rename content as CSS and rename script as lib. Those are just more conventional names. You could call them whatever you wanted. And then we come into our layout, and we're just going to have the app use this JavaScript and CSS directly from www root instead of through the bundle and minify API, which is different now. So instead of having this CSS up at the top, I'm just going to have more traditional link elements to pull these in. And they're not bundled. If I really wanted to, I could go back and add like Webpack or Web Optimizer to bundle these. But for this app, these are fine. And then instead of pulling in the JavaScript, we're going to do this. All right. So now at this point, we have completely upgraded this app to ASP.NET Core. So the final step we see in our run module is we're supposed to try run this. So I'm going to hit F5 and hope I didn't forget anything. We'll see what happens. It's building. Build succeeded. That's a good sign. I will mention that even after it builds, when you're upgrading, you do want to make sure that you run the app and test it because some differences don't show up until runtime if you have a complex scenario. All right, it's loading. And here it is. This is our ASP.NET MVC app upgraded to ASP.NET Core instead. And you can see all of the styling works and everything because we moved those things under www root. But if you were following along, or if I went too fast and you just go to that Learn module after this stream and you do it there, congratulations, you have upgraded to ASP.NET Core. All right, so we are done walking through that Learn module. So I think at this point, I don't know, Jamie, are you taking over, or are we going straight to Andy to talk about the Windows desktop scenario?
Yeah, so we just have a couple quick questions. That
Oh,
was
yeah,
awesome.
absolutely.
So congratulations, Mike. Congratulations, everybody who was able to complete the build online. Amazing. So we have just a couple quick questions
Sure.
that we'll take in between switching over to Andy.
Okay.
Here we go. So I don't understand the difference between ASP versions. Can anyone help? Which one should I learn?
Absolutely. I'm happy to speak to that. So when we talk about ASP.NET Core, that's a new version of ASP.NET that was sort of built from the ground up, I don't know, a few years ago now, to run on top of the .NET Core product, which is now .NET 6. And so if you're using ASP.NET MVC5 or below, or just ASP.NET, that's the older product that's been around for a long time, runs on .NET Framework. It's great if you already have apps there, but for new learning, you specifically want to learn ASP.NET Core because that's the newer product where all new innovation's going, and it has the latest features like better performance and cross-platform support.
Gotcha. Okay. So ASP.NET Core is the answer to that one. Okay. Okay. So field travel, is this?
Yes, one word question. Moniker. Moniker. So when I talk about a target framework moniker, that's just the label for which .NET profile you're building against. Moniker, I mean, is just a name. And so this is the name of the profile. So an example of a target framework moniker would be like .NET 6. So that means when I build my project, if I've specified that target framework moniker, I'm going to build against assemblies that have all of the .NET 6 surface area, and that's the product I'm getting ready to run against. If my target framework moniker was .NET 4.6.1, that means .NET Framework 4.6.1, and so I'm going to build against that surface area and get ready to run on that product. So it's all just about the .NET profile that you're building against and that you're going to run on.
There we go.
All right.
Next question. Does the tool dump logs?
Yes. So the tool does write logs to disk in a text file that sort of captures all the stuff that went out to the console. And you can actually configure that as some of those commands that you can enter. So you can specify whether you want to write to disk or not. But that can be a useful reference for going back and seeing what happened. Also, if you do that analyze command I was talking about that doesn't make any changes, it just sort of lists out what needs to happen, that will create reports specifically for listing out items that need updated. And you can get that in the serif format, which is a standard for diagnostic messages that you can open up and see just sort of like the list of different things that need updated. So yes, there are some logs.
Great. So it is logged. Okay. And Albert asks, any update on the reporting service tool report viewer in WinForm and WPF core? And this might be a question for our next expert, but I'll let you.
This probably is more of an Olia question. I know that the report viewer does not work in .NET Core the same way it did before. I think there are some alternative APIs we want to look at. Off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to this one, except to say, yeah, you're going to have to do some work here and change a few things. If we have anyone else later in the show who's able to speak to this, maybe we can come back to it. Thank you, Dan. There it is. Yeah. So, like I said,
it's not available yet, but
it's good feedback.
Good feedback. It's in the works. Amazing. Well, Mike, thank you so much. That was awesome. We have it all recorded. If you missed any of it or want to go back and check your build, thanks, Mike. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next expert so we can move forward. All righty. So next we have Olya Gavrish. Hi, Olya.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome, welcome. So you'll be covering WinForms or WPF portion?
All of
All
them.
of it, all up. Amazing. Alrighty,
Right.
so let's get your slides up here.
Yeah.
Pull those up. Perfect. All right. Oh yeah, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much. So, yeah, I will start with talking about, in general, the story of desktop and .NET 6 and new Visual Studio. And then I will have Andy who will show you how you can port your applications to .NET 6 with Upgrade Assistant. So, starting with .NET, as Mike already mentioned, .NET 6 is a very amazing platform. It has a absolutely great performance. It has so many perks. And in case of desktop, our recommendation is definitely port to the latest .NET. Port to .NET 6, unless you cannot, you have dependencies and you don't want to use newer alternatives. Yeah, it's okay to stay on the .NET framework, but all the new development, all new features, latest language updates, they all are coming in .NET, .NET 6, future versions of .NET 7, 8, and so on. So if you want to really use the latest and greatest in the tech, upgrade to .NET 6. And there are also updates in Visual Studio. In the latest Visual Studio 2022, we've made lots of tooling improvements for desktop applications, WinForms and WPF. And that is a hot reload. Now you can hot reload everywhere. We have XAML and C# hot reload, and you can run your application, make changes to the app, and see those changes applied in your running app. That way, you don't have to stop your app, go to Visual Studio, update it, run it again. You can just fine tune your UI, you can fine tune your business logic, and see the changes already applied. We have a XAML live preview, and I'll talk about it when I will be talking about new things for WPF, but that's also a great productivity tool. We made updates to IntelliCode. Now it's even easier. Visual Studio does more work for you, so you can really focus on thinking and let the tool take care of all mechanics. We have built-in Git and GitHub integration, enhanced debugging and testing tools. We have different themes. Now you can colorize Visual Studio to your liking and upload even third-party themes that we developed in collaboration with open source community. We have different color tabs, and the Visual Studio 2022 is the first Visual Studio that is 60-bit application. So now you can really leverage and take advantage of all the performance that you can. And with that, let's talk about specifically WPF. What is new in WPF? Well, as I mentioned, we have XAML Live Preview, and that is a window in Visual Studio that shows your running application. So we've heard some complaints from our users when you're using only one screen and you're running your WPF application, you're using hot reload, you're changing the code, want to see how it looks like, you have to switch between the screens. And now there is a chance to see your running app inside Visual Studio. That's a standard Visual Studio window that you can resize, you can move around. Not only that, but you can also use some visual tools for creating pixel perfect UI. Like there are rulers, there are different measurements. You can see what is the offset, what is the basic like font, margin, etc. So check it out. You to enable it, if it's not, it should be on by default, but you can go in the Visual Studio search box and just type XAML Live Preview, and it will be right there on the screen. Give it a shot. We also have a new feature called Quick Actions, and that is a light bulb that appears in the designer for your WPF applications. So when you click on the light bulb, you have access to the most commonly used properties for this specific control. And that way, if you're using designer with just a few clicks, you can set font, name, whatever you want. You don't have to go into property windows. You don't have to go to your code. You can just do it with few clicks. We have design time data and sample data that allows you to mock the data in your designer. So for example, if you're developing some MVVM application and your data layer is not ready yet, or you just don't want to run your app and see how your data will be looking on your UI, you want to develop UI when you see controls populated with data. You can mock it with test data inside designer, and that way you don't have to run your app at all. You just specify values, you see it in the designer. That way you can see how's the font, does it fit properly, do you want to make some changes, change sizes, etc. Then we made some XAML binding improvements, and that way when you go to binding, the picture that's shown on the screen, you'll see that it's much easier to data bind now. We have IntelliSense improvements for MVVM scenarios. As I mentioned, XAML hot reload, and we updated our WPF XAML designer for .NET Framework applications. So in the older Visual Studio versions, we had one designer for .NET Framework and the new designer for .NET Core and .NET 5 and .NET 6 apps. And in the latest versions of Visual Studio, we made it one designer. That's the latest designer, the designer that we called Core before. It's much better, it's more powerful. So even if you're staying in .NET Framework, still upgrade to latest Visual Studio. That way you will get better designer and better capabilities. Now let's talk about WinForms. So what is new in WinForms? We got some new features. We got application-wide default font. So as you know, probably if you're developing WinForms applications, recently we changed the default font. And for some applications that were written years ago, but they were pixel perfect, that change of the font caused them some troubles. So now we introduce an API that allows you, with just one line, set the default font all over your application. So if you want to go back to the font that we had before, it's very easy. If you just want to set the default font to something new in all your forms, all your controls, one line, and you're done. We made some accessibility improvements, and I'll show you them later. We have a new data binding scenarios, and on that topic we are still working and we're collecting the feedback. So if you're developing your applications with data, if you have some preferences how you want data binding to be done in WinForms, please do reach out. I'm talking to many of our users and trying to define what is the data binding scenario of the future for WinForms. Also, high DPI issues within latest .NET, with latest Visual Studio. High DPI improvements are all over the place, and we made WinForms much better compatible with 4K monitors, etc. I also got a lot of questions about the designer. So yes, we are still working on it, but we are very close. The designer is in much better and stable form. And now we have strip controls editing. We fixed a lot of issues related to reliability. We have improvements in multiple controls editing. When you select like 20, 30 controls, now you can move them around, copy paste. Before, there were some issues related to that, not anymore. We're working actively with our third-party control vendors, and we created SDK for them. We're constantly talking. We're making sure that their controls have a clear path in the latest designers with latest .NET. And we improved designer load time. So in the earlier versions of .NET Core, .NET 6 WinForms Designer, it took some time for designer to load the form when you first open it. Now it's happening asynchronously and it's much faster. So let's talk more about performance. As we said before, performance for .NET 6 is much, much better. And here you can see exactly the same application. It's a WinForms app. One is targeting .NET Framework. And then what I did, I just retargeted to .NET 6. I didn't make a single change in the app. It's exactly identical copy. But here you can see the difference in all the basic operations. It's allocation is much less. The performance is through the roof compared to .NET Framework. So definitely try to upgrade. You'll get much better performance right away. We have a new control in WinForms. After many years of not adding anything, we have a task dialog. And task dialog, you can think of it as a message box on steroids, right? It's a super customizable way of delivering the message to your users. And we did it with the help of our open source community. And Konstantin Preiser is our open source contributor. He suggested that feature and he did almost all the work. He participated with our team in API reviews. We're super thankful to him and to all other contributors who did so many PRs, suggested features, added new improvements to WinForms. So thank you so much if you're doing it. We're very, very thankful. If you want to collaborate and if you want to contribute to our repositories, there are many ways how you can do it. There is WinForms and WPF are open source repositories, so you can go there and there are issues that are marked up for grabs or good first bug. So if you don't know how to start, that would be the great way to start. And reach out to our team. Feel free to suggest features, suggest PRs. We really, really appreciate your help. And let's develop the future platform together. We have another new control that is called WebView 2, and that one is based on the latest it's Chromium-based control. It's the successor of a browser control. It's available for both WinForms and WPF, and it's very easy to add it to your project. You just add a NuGet package, and you'll see WebView control right there in your toolbox, and then you use it as the regular control. You can drag it to your form. And I think Andy has a WebView control in his demo. So I'm going to stop right here and let Andy show you all the magic of the latest control. Also, we did some accessibility improvements. And for that, we improved the way how accessive technologies such as narrator or automated testing can talk to controls. So now we improved the narrator for certain controls. It's much better to test automate the controls. We also improved the contrast for certain controls to make it more accessible. And high DPI fixes. That's the last thing before I let you see the demo of porting. But you can see on the left side, that's .NET 5. For .NET Framework, it would work if it would look even worse. And on the right side, .NET 6. So certain controls on high DPI monitors for WinForms were not doing so well. Now it's much better, and we keep working in this direction as well. Right, and with this, I have everything regarding the new things in .NET 6 and Visual Studio. I can go through, answer a few questions, and then we can see how you can port your application to .NET 6 with Upgrade Assistant.
Yes, that would be awesome. So we do have some questions for you, Olya. That was really beautiful. I love to see all the accessibility updates as well.
Thank you.
So we have, so the design time data improvements, how are those coming along?
Design time data improvements, is that for WPF?
It did come during your session, so I'm going to assume yes.
So I think we have this feature already. If that is about design time data, yes, it's already there. I consider it done features, so go ahead and use it. Let us know if you have any questions or if you need more tutorials, documentation, but yeah, it's there for you to use.
Okay, great. So yeah, I guess that means it's there. Suggest improvements it's been did. Okay, so is WPF staying or being replaced with something better?
That is a great question. So first of all, WPF is not going anywhere. We are supporting it and we are investing in it as much as in WinForms. It's on the latest .NET. It receives all the new tooling improvements and it's fully supported. That being said, if you need something else, like for example, WPF is gonna be WinForms only technology. Windows is in the name. It has a very strong dependency on Windows. So if you need to build a cross-platform application, you can consider something else. For example, Maui. That's our new cross-platform solution, and it is in the preview, but you already can check it out and see if that works for you. If you want to build something, if you have different like needs for your app, it's okay to consider anything else. But if WPF works great for you, there's no need to switch to something else. WPF will be there and receive all the latest updates.
Great. Okay. Is there a way to compile a WPF app using ahead of time compilation?
Yes, I believe so. I'm not sure on this one, but I'm pretty sure, yeah, it's available in the project file. You can set the property and use it. I know that Rich Lander is working on ahead of a time compilation for all the platforms. So, yeah.
Great. In Silverlight project, how should I deal with it? Great question.
Yes, probably consider some alternatives. Well, the question is, what exactly would you like to deal with? If you're asking if you should start, what should you use for new applications? That yeah, I would recommend any of our desktop stacks. There is Maui that is cross-platform. There's also WinForms WPF that are there. WinUI 3. So, yeah, see what best works in your case.
Yeah, John says also see opensilver.net.
Oh yeah, there.
Info, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so did you have the demo? Or are we going to bring Andy on for the demo?
We're gonna bring Andy.
Okay, amazing. All right, hey Andy.
Hi, I'm here.
Welcome, welcome. Oh, thank you, Olya. That was awesome. You get to cover that, and then you get to do the fun demo part.
Yep, I get to fill in that time.
All righty. So, yep, we have your screen loaded here, and I will let you take that away.
Okay, yeah, I'm Andy DeGeorge. I'm a doc writer for .NET, spanning lots of different areas of that. And so, as part of getting some of the documentation written for the Upgrade Assistant, I just came up with some quick little apps that sort of touch different aspects of the technology so that when I'm upgrading and writing about it, I can kind of run into some issues and maybe point some things out. So this app is WPF based, and it just briefly it doesn't really do anything big. It has an SQLite database. It is using NuGet packages, and it's using theming from a NuGet package, and then it's also uses it's a two project solution that we're going to upgrade, and it uses a user control in one of those projects. So I'll demo how it works real fast. This is a catalog your favorite websites and rank them app, and right in the middle, I'll do a zoom. I think maybe that will help. Yeah, there we go. In the middle is the web browser control, and we'll add a site. So we'll add probably the best Wikipedia um, page there is on the internet, which is the .NET page, and we're giving it 5 stars, of course. And so this app is also using data binding, data validation, and it uses a really light sort of MVVM concept that I just implemented directly. So with that added, now let's navigate to it. And oh, of course, as we're using the old web browser control, which is built on the old Internet Explorer, it does not work well in the modern world. So as part of the upgrade, we'll fix those kind of issues. Starting the upgrade, As was demonstrated with the ASP.NET, there is a single project that was upgraded. So we'll look at upgrading a solution. So we'll run the upgrade assistant, and upgrade, and then I think it's website rating solution. And so when this starts off, it'll actually analyze the solution and it requests that you choose what's the entry point project. And that is the project that you end up running out of your solution to run the app. And so we'll start that step and say, okay, we have two projects. We have the control project and we have the website ratings, the main project. So we'll select website ratings as our main project. Now, the next step is to choose which project we want to start upgrading. Because we chose the entry point project, it will then build a dependency graph out of all the projects in the solution and figure out what order you should upgrade your project. So we can see here, it says we should start with the control because the main app actually depends on that. And we'll select that, but we're not going to upgrade that project just yet. Instead, I've already upgraded that, and we're going to skip ahead to the main project because the user control project really has nothing in it that would present any sort of issue or problem. So we're not going to demo that. The great thing about the upgrade tool is it actually allows you to exit at any point in your upgrade process, and it saves your progress so that you can come back later. So if you run into a problem where you're not sure what decision you should make, you can stop, look at your code, your project, figure it out, and then you can come back to the upgrade and continue on. And so that's sort of what I did is I just copied off another version that was already in progress. So we'll just start the upgrade again on this other project, and you'll see it'll automatically jump straight into selecting our next project because the star vote control, which is a 5-star vote control, that's what I made for that, has already been upgraded. So we'll choose website ratings, and I'll kind of go through some of this a little bit faster because it was all covered using the upgrade tool in the ASP.NET Core portion, but there are some differences that we can look at when upgrading a WPF and a WinForms app. Largely, it's exactly the same going through these steps, no matter what you're upgrading, whether it's WinForms or WPF. But some of the steps are finely tuned for those projects, and it will alert you on those things. So again, always want to back up our projects, and I would even do it manually before you even start. Anything that you want touching your code, you should just have a copy of somewhere else. Um, so when we upgrade the project file, we can notice that it's actually going to. It says here that it's going to recommend that we upgrade to the .NET 6.0 Windows TFM moniker, target framing moniker, because we're using a Windows only technology, which is WPF. So we're not going to get that target to just .NET 6. We do have to have the Windows flavor of that. As part of upgrading NuGet packages, as was mentioned, the format has changed where they're in the project file now. And one of the steps actually ends up cleaning up a lot of those references because I think Mike, was mentioned earlier, but the transitive dependencies, like when you reference a NuGet package in .NET Framework, it would include all of the dependent packages that package was also referenced on. So if you had package A referencing package B and you reference package A in your project, you get B also. And so part of this cleanup is in the new .NETs, you don't need to reference all the dependencies. You only need to reference the top level packages. So it will clean those references up for you. It also goes through and suggests the updates for NuGet packages. So it'll look at your dependencies like, okay, you're now targeting .NET 6 with Windows. What can we erase from the dependencies that we had previously? Because either they're no longer needed, or perhaps even should we upgrade those to new NuGet packages, because a lot of stuff that was in .NET Framework has been released as a NuGet package now, so that's just not automatically included when you are creating your project. The config files section, the app config, this was touched on And we noticed that in 7A, 7C, those ones went marked completed automatically. That's because the upgrade assistant has actually analyzed our app and says, we don't have any application settings, we don't have any unsupported sections. So we'll complete those steps, preemptively complete those steps, and we don't need to actually run those. So the next step, because our app is using the SQLite database, we have a connection string. So we will migrate that connection string to the new app settings.json file. We actually don't, in this simple project, we really don't have any source code problems that are detected, so it doesn't need to do any fixes there. And at this point, we were actually done migrating our project. So we'll finalize, and then we'll open our project in Visual Studio. So let's open up the solution and get this running. Now, you always want to test your app and explore it after it's upgraded, because there may be something that actually just didn't get upgraded correctly, or there's a problem. And if we look at the website ratings, the entry point app, we can see that there is a problem with one of the packages, and that's the system configuration manager package, which is version 5.0. Because the app config file is not sort of the native um, uh, a native technology that's just included in .NET 6, as it was with .NET Framework. It's actually distributed as a NuGet package so that you can read your app config files. So app config files are still supported in .NET Core using these packages, but as was mentioned, the app settings.json is the more modern way to store those settings. And um, so we have some sort of issue with this, and if we actually expand it, we'll see that let me widen this. The the explanation is that it's getting downgraded from the version 6 to version 5. And the reason for this is because the upgrade assistant, because of the control that we were creating in the start control library, it actually added the Windows compatibility package. Now, this is a NuGet package that's been released that it pulls in a lot of .NET Frameworks type technologies so that you can still access a lot of stuff that's Windows native, such as the registry and other aspects. And if we actually open that package, we can see all of the different dependencies that this has. So it provides access to those .NET Framework libraries. And so part of that was the configuration manager 6.0. And there's a bug in the upgrade assistant that for some reason it's choosing 5.0 in the other project. And so that's one that's an issues filed, and that will eventually get fixed. So you might run into these problems and have to report issues, but let's go fix it ourselves. So opening up the NuGet manager for the project, let's go find that, and then we can upgrade to 6. Another way to do this is because the project files themselves moving away from .NET Framework are much simpler and actually easier to go hand change. If we open up the project file, we can see here's our dependencies, our package references, and we see here's 5.0. So it might just be easier and quicker to sit there and say, I know there's a 6.0, so I'm just going to come in, edit this, save it, and then that will automatically pull in our correct package, and now it's working. So let's run this version on .NET Core or .NET 6 and see how it works. Now, this copy did not have any entry in there already, so we'll add that real fast. Let's see, we'll zoom in again. So we'll say wiki, 5-star, of course, because it's .NET. Save it, and then let's browse to it. Same error. Even though we've come to upgrade to .NET 6, we're still using the old control. So the first thing we want to do is update to that WebView 2 control, and zoom back out, and let's open up. Well, first thing we're going to do is actually we're going to add reference to that control, which is a NuGet package. So we'll say WebView 2. Don't need a pre-release. It works fine with the last supported final release that's not preview. So we'll just go with that version. We'll install that. Yes. We'll do a compile just to make sure that any XAML stuff is picked up, so that when a namespace is picked up, so when we go edit our main window, in our main window, let's do this. I'm going to update the text a little bit bigger, and let's add our namespace for this control. So add wv2 equals, and then up the, oh, did I spell? I did spell that. I reversed those two. I did it again. There we go. Okay, so now we'll just type in WebView2 and it'll end up finding it. And you can see there's a WinForms control version and a WPF version. So we'll pull in the WPF. We'll scroll down to our, actually we'll click on it. Here's our old control. So we'll just change this straight up to the WebView2 control. And so now this is updated to use the new control. The way this app currently works is there's a little bit of code behind on this file just for loading the website when an item is changed. That code doesn't compile. It's not exactly API exact with the old web browser control. So we need to update that too. And that is actually just a source property that's set to a URI. Now that code is fixed. So let's run it again and see this update. Get back there. Click on Quickie, and now the new WebView2 control browses the web just like you would expect. Now there's more modernization that we can end up doing. Like I said, the app config file has kind of gone away. It's still there, but as other libraries and frameworks are updating to .NET 6, they're going to start taking advantage of the new flexible app settings.json file. So as part of our upgrade, even though we can keep using app config, let's swap over. The app settings JSON was created and our connection string was migrated. So we're actually sort of ready to go. We just needed to write the code to actually load that in. Here's our app config version. Same thing. Let's delete the app config. And since our app settings is already updated because of the upgrade assistant, we just need to write the code to actually read it. In our app, we need to actually add reference to one NuGet package, which is the extensions configuration package. And we're going to use a JSON loader to load our app settings JSON. So we'll actually just reference that package directly. Add that in. Now we'll have the library to read the app settings config or app settings.json and actually load it into our framework in our system. And to do that, we need to actually do this ourselves, build it out. Now, it was quick and easy with the app config because the library just handled it, but there's a little bit of bootstrap code that you have to do yourself because of how flexible the app settings that JSON system is, or the extensions configuration system is. You have to do that. Now, you would probably use some sort of dependency injection to get reference to the configs system moved around your app, but we're just going to use a straightforward public static a property that we can reference from our database model. Well, first we need to add, let's see, actually, we'll just use Visual Studio's great suggestion system. So we'll say we want the configuration type. Yep, add that in using, and then we'll just name our property config. Now the suggestions come up. Yep, we want that, but we're going to make this private because we don't want other people or other aspects of our code setting up config. So now we need to load it. When our app starts, what we're going to do is call the, we're going to get config set up, and the suggestion comes up and knows already, hey, you're probably just going to use the configuration builder type. Even though we declared the property as an interface, it knows that this type is implementing that interface and it's the main one. So it's automatically suggesting that's what we want to do. So the new features of Visual Studio are really great for speeding up your code. And what we want to do is add a JSON file. And this is going to be the app settings.json. And then we finalize the configuration. So configuration can actually come from environment settings or from other aspects, even using code. Like you can get a callback and set up configuration in different ways or pull in data from other aspects. And so that's why it's more flexible, but it just requires a little bit of work for how you want to load your configuration. Now that that's done, let's go over to our database where our old connection string is. And in here, this is our configuration manager we were using that loaded the connection string. So we need to update this to our config. Now, if we just simply add our app config, and then, we had connection string. So let's say get connection. Oh, no, we got section, but not connection. So connection string is actually implemented as an extension method. So let's add that namespace in here. Microsoft extensions, configuration, and now we should get our get connection string method. So sometimes it can trick you. You might not know exactly where it is. So if we want to get the database connection string, and the type automatically comes back as a string because it knows it's going to be a string. So you don't have to do any conversion or anything like that. So now that's set up, and then let's run our app again. And now we'll be using, oh, of course. Oh, that's right. One more thing. The upgrade assistant actually didn't mark app settings at JSON as copy to output because, I don't know if it's just not sure if you do want it, but this would be a manual step you would then do. So we want to say copy of newer. Now let's run it. Yep, and everything works. Our connection string to the database loaded the file or the entry, and it's still working. So even though everything's working, we've kind of done some modernization. There's even more that we could do because we can go look at our dependencies. If we look at what was installed for .NET Framework to get our SQLite working, we used 1.0 as our package. This old package used .NET Framework 4.5.1, so it was what our original app was targeting. However, there's been a lot of updates to this package since 2016. So as part of that, let's update to the latest 6.01. And this will change a lot of our dependencies, what we were pulling in, what we needed. And, with updating these types of libraries, you get, usually you get security fixes and, those types of issues addressed. The SQLite library was required as a dependency, see, it's 2016, on that other library. So we actually don't need this even referenced anymore. So we can get rid of that. And let this refresh. And we got rid of configuration manager, or we don't need it because we got rid of the app config file. So we can get rid of this also. We don't need it. And one thing we'll look at too, this my apps metro, this was the UI NuGet library that I used. It's actually built on .NET Framework, and it doesn't have necessarily a .NET 6 version, but there is a .NET Core App 3.1 version. And so the even though we're targeting .NET 6, we're still referencing a lot of Windows components because we're WPF and we're Windows only, but we're also able to use some of those other older libraries, even though we're on a newer .NET. And just to prove that I'm not lying or made a mistake, I'll run it again. And sure enough, it's working still. So that's the end of my demo. That was how to use the update tool and modernize. You're always going to have to come up and do some more stuff. And even though things work, you get to look at and examine your app to see where can you tweak things, where can you make things better. and it's a always involved process.
Well, awesome, Andy. That was such a great demo. Oh man, I loved seeing it work through. And I think Wiki was a fun demo for that. So we have a few questions. And I'm wondering, we have a bit of time left at the end, and I'm wondering, should we bring a few folks back on, or let's maybe address these questions first? Here, I'll ask you a couple questions, and then maybe we'll bring some other folks on to have like a whole Q&A. Okay, so are implicit data templates still supported in WPF?
That would be an Olia question. I believe it is, because I don't think a lot of those features have been removed, but I'm not going to be the official answer on that. But
Fair. We'll leave that question for Olia. So Andy, which MVVM framework are you using for this demo?
So I didn't use any framework directly. And actually, if you want to show my screen again, I can browse through some of that. I think we have some time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I used to be a WPF dev years back before I got into doing documentation, and we used all sorts of different frameworks. Rolling our own constantly, and then realizing, oh my gosh, people have actually created some amazing frameworks for WPF. And in this case, I created this app within a day. I had been out of the WPF area for quite a while, actually, like deeply involved. It's been a while, so I wasn't sure what to use. And so I just kind of did a very basic MVVM system with using um, the concepts, at least, that I'm familiar with. And I think I had some base classes. Yeah, so I just did a simple view model base, which implements that I notify property changed. And as part of the updates, I think I don't know which .NET framework, one of the .NET frameworks added this caller member name, so you could easily um, raise the event with where the event came from, if you're familiar with this concept. And so looking at where that's implemented, I think I'll zoom out a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. Um, I just sort of added, here's a property, and then call that base class method and then that automatically passes in, hey, selected site property is calling this method, and it would just sort of jam that into the property string um, parameter automatically because of this attribute I put there. So that took care of all of that stuff really fast. And then for the commanding stuff I was using on here, I just created, I pulled from Stack Overflow just some basic code for doing, predicate commands and action commands. And then I even made one specific to the UI, which was when I push the accept button, I want to close the window automatically because I clicked the accept button. So this command is actually attached to a button and sort of detects that, hey, there's no window involved here, so I can't use this command, and it would just raise an exception for your app. So I really just did some basic stuff. The database for the model is very simple. It's, read the sites and return them, and then the site has its own little type with the sort of commands you end up doing, saving, deleting, and reading is handled by the other one. So I just did the model, the view model, and then the views were all done. Same thing with just data binding. So I'll open a view real fast, the add item. And then oh, that's right. I added some validation rules also, but this just uses a straight binding pass for, the types being passed into the window itself as the data context. So, but same thing with let's see, rules. I just added a few little rules for like when there's empty text or the URL needs to have, HTTPS or HTTP, so it was just a really basic MVVM thing that I just came up with in trying to make sure that I could get it done, right away without too much, like, if I run into a bug with another framework and I'm like, well, why doesn't it work this way? And I think it should work this way or something like that. So I really just came up with something simple, but any production app, I would totally be using someone else's framework who has gone through all those pains for me.
Yeah, building off other people's work.
Yeah, other people's failures that leads to my success.
Failure equals success eventually.
Exactly.
Yeah, speaking of that, Andy, is your before and after code available online for folks to contribute to or mess around, play around with?
Yes. So the articles. This is actually I wrote this app and a Windows. There's a Windows Form app that Olia wrote. That the Upgrade Assistant articles on docs.microsoft.com and the .NET area, and I think someone will share a link somewhere. But those articles actually go through my exact demo of upgrading, running the upgrade assistant, going through the steps, detailing what's kind of happening, and then actually having the post upgrade stuff where you come in, edit the files and update your NuGet packages, and then it has the before and afters in our .NET samples repo. So those are available for download to check. Don't judge me based on that code. So, like I said, I just sort of threw it up there. I know I definitely violated some stuff, and things are not, as amazing as they could be, but it was, sort of just to get it done.
Yeah, no, I'm sure those are great. And those are in the resources. I think it was just posted below
Cool.
in that sample as well. All righty. So we have some time, and I think it would be really fun if we brought everybody back on, and then maybe a few extra folks from the team here. I know we have a bunch of questions for Olia, so I want to make sure. Yay! So we have Dan Roth here. This is amazing. Yay! And we have Kathy Sullivan. Wow, wow, wow. Okay, so do you want to do like a quick round of intros really quick, just so folks know who our other friends are? I'll go with Kathy.
Yeah, so I'm Kathy Sullivan. Nice to meet you all. I'm my specific role is the upgrade assistant and helping all these lovely folks here on the call integrate into the tool, figuring out how we can make it better, and also helping us figure out what we're going to do .NET 7 to make upgrades easier for you all, no matter what workload you're on. So.
Excellent. Yes, thank you for joining us, Kathy. So Dan, next this way.
Hi, yes, I'm Daniel Roth. I'm a program manager on the ASP.NET Core team. I work on our web UI frameworks like MVC, Razor Pages, and Blazor.
Amazing. Welcome. Yeah, and like choose them. So Andy, I don't know if you actually got a chance to fully introduce yourself there.
Up. Okay, up to block. Yeah. So I'm Andy D. George. I work on the .NET Docs team, and just even though I'm introducing myself, I want to point out that the Upgrade Assistant is one of the greatest things that I've seen created for .NET because it really just handles a lot of that annoying lifting you do with when you're copying files. Like, I'm going to create a new project, then I'm going to copy each file in, and then I'm going to test it and see how it runs. Oh, it's missing this. So just use it. It's amazing.
It's amazing. All right, Mike.
So yeah, Mike Roussos. I'm a software engineer on the .NET Customer Engagement team. So it's a customer-facing part of the .NET engineering org. So we go out, help customers who are getting started with new .NET and Azure app development technologies so that we can make sure they're successful and so that we can learn what that experience is like. And then we can bring back what we've learned and then make improvements based on it. And since Andy says Upgrade Assistant's cool, I'll share that came out of one of the engagements my team did with a customer where they had hundreds of ASP.NET apps and they said, well, yeah, we could upgrade these, but that takes a long time. And so we worked with them to sort of prototype, well, is it useful to automate some of this, knowing that we can't do the whole thing for web scenarios? And we found that there was some value in it. And then that turned into what now is the Upgrade Assistant tool that we've been working with.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So customer stories, customer engagement, that like really helps feed how we develop our products going forward. That's awesome. And Olia, last but not least.
Yeah. So my name is Olia Gavrish, and I'm PM for .NET Desktop Applications, and that is WinForms, WPF, work a little bit on MAUI. So that is my area of expertise.
Amazing.
And of course, I work with all these amazing people that just introduced themselves.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for all of you joining this call. This is a little bit different than what we normally do on the Let's Learn.net event. So I'm very excited to have all of you here. And we'll just jump right into questions. And whoever thinks they can take it or has any additional, we'll just go like that.
I can take the quick one about implicit data templates for WPF. Yes, it is supported in .NET 6, and a lot, like almost everything that was in WPF, we just took and poured to .NET 6. So we should be good.
Great. So got that one on there. Will the Upgrade Assistant support web forms in the future?
So the situation there is no web forms equivalent in ASP.NET Core. ASP.NET Core has MVC, it has Blazor, it has Razor pages, but no web forms. Blazor, you can kind of squint at it and say, well, it looks web forms-ish. I mean, they both have, the web forms has controls, Blazor has components, they're both event-driven, UI frameworks, component-based UI frameworks, but it is a completely different framework. You're not going to be able to take your web forms control and just like magically turn it into a Blazor component. So a web forms to ASP.NET Core modernization or migration is quite a bit of a rewrite of that UI layer. You can still use a lot of the techniques that Mike talked about, where you can take your core logic and business logic, move that into libraries, make that work on .NET Core, and then just start rewriting the UI pieces, the pieces that are actually dealing with the HTML. Maybe turn those into Blazor components, or you can turn them into MVC views or Razor pages. But it is work. And if you're a web forms developer and you have a big web forms app, first of all, don't feel that you actually have to do that. Web forms is part of the .NET framework, which is part of Windows, and is supported along with the Windows platform. So as long as Windows is there, pretty much, you can pretty much assume you'll have support for your web forms applications, and that's totally fine. We have lots and lots of web forms developers that are very happy continuing to develop with web forms on the .NET framework. If you are specifically trying to modernize though and hit new scenarios, like you need to go cross-platform, or you really want to take advantage of some new features that are in .NET 6, then you are looking at a more substantial effort there. Web forms is kind of the hardest thing to move. I mean, it's not impossible. People do it, but it's more work than, say, if you had an MVC app and you can just move over your controllers, move over your views.
And we have an ebook called Blazor for Web Forms Developers, or something along those lines, that's a really good resource for that scenario. We had talked about whether we should add the ability for Upgrade Assistant to migrate web forms to Blazor, and ultimately decided no, at least for now, just because we didn't think we could do it usefully. I mean, I guess I wouldn't completely rule it out, but like Dan said, they're so different that it's really a rewrite. So yeah, take a look at the ebook though, because that might be useful as a resource when you're sort of going back and just re-implementing those web forms views as Blazor.
I would also add, we are doing work in .NET 7 to try and make this process a little bit more approachable. You have a big web forms app, you're probably not going to be able to just wholesale migrate it all at once, unless it's a smaller app. Ideally, you should be able to sort of slice off pieces of it and replace those with ASP.NET Core-based pieces, maybe using Blazor, and be able to do that in place so that you can continue to develop on and evolve the application while you're doing that migration. Like maybe you migrate a page at a time type of thing. So we're looking at ways that we can potentially have the ASP.NET app and the ASP.NET Core pieces kind of side by side and integrated in various ways so that they can all be a part of a whole application, maybe sharing authentication state, sharing session state, making it easier to share libraries across those two parts of the application. We're going to do some work to make that a little bit more approachable, but it still will be work because it's not like WPF and WinForms where the app model is just there and you just move to it. Web Forms it's a different thing than what we offer with ASP.NET Core.
And building off that, we'll look to have the Upgrade Assistant help wherever it can in .NET 7 as well too with that. So.
Great. Yes, looks for .NET 7. So Michael Powell asks, what happens when you have multiple entry points for different reasons, for example, servers, clients, etc.?
Yeah, so I can take that one. I'm sure this is about with Upgrade Assistant, because when Andy was demoing it, you choose your entry point, and then it decides which projects to upgrade in which order based on that. So there's actually a couple ways you can approach this. If you've got a lot of entry points, you want to upgrade all of them. The other one that wasn't listed here is tests count as an entry point, and you want to upgrade your test projects. We have command line parameters for Upgrade Assistant where you can specify your entry point when you start the tool rather than interactively, and you can specify multiple entry points that way, or even use a star to just say, just consider everything important. And so that way the tool will then find all of the projects needed by any of those entry points that you specify.
Gotcha. Okay, so also for Michael, do the JSON config load from JSON load as the server configuration object types or as the configuration object types?
I can take this one too if I'm not talking too much. So when we're doing these upgrades and starting to use app settings.json and things like that, that's a separate config system. So there's the Microsoft extensions configuration config system that is used by ASP.NET Core by default, and that's different from system.configuration, which was in .NET Framework and classic ASP.NET. So all of the system.configuration APIs are still present and can be used, but when you start using the new config providers like JSON and getting config out of environment variables or Azure Config Service, whatever, that's going to use the new model. So it's not going to be using anything out of the system configuration namespace. Those are going to be iConfiguration objects from the Microsoft Extensions configuration system.
And that package set can be, it's quite vast, the amount of NuGet packages and scenarios that thing can cover too. So it's worth exploring all the different options that you can see just by doing a NuGet search for that package.
Oh, very cool. Is there a public repo available for the before and after comparison?
Yes, so this is in our .NET samples repo. And I will get some links.
We'll get that link.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll find it and share it with you guys, and then you guys can post it or something.
Yeah. Can a WPF app that uses XAML islands be updated to .NET 6?
Yes. So we didn't break anything in XAML. Still, XAML islands is not the finalized experience, right? There's not designer support as we would like to, but if it worked in the previous versions of .NET, it should work in .NET 6.
Great. Silly Queen X says, would be nice to use the source generators as modernization for generating all of boilerplate stuff related to INPC.
It's a great suggestion. We
Yeah,
we have been talking about, like any place where we like generate, where you have to basically generate a bunch of code in order to move or replace a bunch of code. We're looking at various set of technologies, including source generators, for how do we create that code. I don't know exactly. Does the .NET Upgrade Assistant under the covers using source generators today, or is it doing?
It's not yet. It's a lot more primitive than that. It's just got template files and it does some string replacements. But I do like the source generator idea. I think that's worth looking into. Be more flexible.
Yeah, good idea.
Great suggestion.
And actually, something I should point out along those lines is that the Upgrade Assistant is open source and developed entirely in the open. So if you have ideas like that, if you go out to github.com/.net/upgrade-assistant, is that what we call it? I think that's the URL. I'll double check. You can file issues there. We've got a discussion board there. You can open pull requests. We love taking community contributions. So all that sort of stuff can go out on GitHub, and we can make the product better that way.
Excellent. So Pavel says, on which framework should I write a Win app today? Should I wait for Maui, Blazor, WPF, UWP? What do you think?
So I think I can express my opinion, and then everybody else welcome to express theirs. I think that really depends on what kind of app are you building and what do you need, what are your priorities, what are your skill set, and so on. So if you have a framework that you love like you're building WPF applications, you like it, there's no reason to move anywhere else if you don't have any needs that WPF doesn't fulfill. If you want to build cross-platform apps, if you want to deploy to different platforms such as iOS, Android, then definitely choose Maui, and there's no need to wait for it. You can check it out right now, use the preview version. Just keep in mind that it's preview, so we will finalize, fine-tune the experience, but you already can start working on it. Or you can work, even use Xamarin Forms, and then port it to Maui if that is what you prefer. Of course, Dan can tell you more about Amazing Blazor, and I would not choose UWP. I would choose WinUI 3 because WinUI 3, if that's where you want to go, WinUI 3 is a successor of UWP. So start with the latest platform.
Yeah, for Blazor, like Blazor is really a web framework, right? It's intended to target the web platform, HTML, CSS. It's just that instead of having to write JavaScript for your logic, you can write C# and use .NET libraries. We are integrating Blazor into native client development for the .NET MAUI wave of releases. So you can take your Blazor components and embed them into a native client app, very similar to what I think Andy was showing, where you have an embedded web view control, except the content that's being rendered to that embedded web view control could be Blazor component content. So that's something that you'll be able to use, honestly, wherever the web platform is available. We're working to enable Blazor components rendering from within a .NET MAUI app. So if you care about cross-platform mobile and desktop UI, and you're coming from a web developer background, that could really be a winning combination. Or if you have WPF or WinForms apps and you want to leverage web UI in those applications, maybe leverage dev resources that you have that have a web development background, that will be an option as well. I think of it more as an audience play, though. Like if web is something you're familiar with and know and love and want to leverage, then using Blazor in these native client apps is really appealing. If your goal is more, I want native platform UI, like I want to use the UI controls from the underlying stack, then you will need to use the corresponding abstractions, either MAUI abstractions for those native controls or the direct abstractions in like WPF and or WinUI 3.
Awesome. Really quick, I just want to thanks Jeff Fritz for rating our Twitch stream. They just brought over a bunch of folks. So welcome everybody who just joined. We're so happy to have you. Woo! And thanks, Jeff. So next question, we have a product for enterprise, and our product uses .NET 4.6.2. We fear upgrading to .NET 6. What should we do? Should we try this huge piece of code for .NET 6? Should we use .NET Web API and Angular for FE?
Fear not. You're going the right direction.
I know.
I'm sorry if it feels scary, but I think that's the right way to go. Like that app sounds like a great candidate for moving over. You like obviously the JavaScript front end, well that's not even .NET related. That will just come over with you. Web API on the back end, that should port fairly cleanly, and the upgrade assistant should be able to help you quite a bit with that. I don't know, Mike, if you want to talk to that about what the porting experience is like.
Yeah, exactly what you said. I think of all of the web scenarios, web APIs probably one of the easier ones to do. I mean, they all take work, but I think if this is an app that's important to the enterprise and that you'd like to have better performance with, or run cross-platform, or just be able to use modern features as you're continuing to develop, I think moving to .NET 6 makes a lot of sense for a web API. Something you could look at, since there's some anxiety about whether this is going to be worth it or not, is you could look at the dependencies you have, go through your NuGet dependencies, and just see if all of those things are available for .NET 6 or .NET Standard, and maybe use a tool like the .NET Portability Analyzer to confirm that you're not using .NET APIs that are missing, like creating app domains or WCF or something like that. And as long as there's no red flags there, I would say, yeah, .NET 6, absolutely. I think it sounds like a great candidate.
For WCF, even with WCF, we do support WCF clients. So if you have WCF client code, you're fine. The server pieces of WCF are not part of .NET 6 and the modern .NET platform, but there are open source alternatives. There's a project called Core WCF, I think, that does enable SOAP scenario. So that might be an alternative if that's an issue in your app.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. We have some links down there for reference. Moving quickly. So another question is MVVM Lite from the new .NET Community Toolkit ready for production?
I don't know. I mean, I probably have to ask that repo or wherever that's hosted.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be best to ask on that actual repo. So Jason asks, where can we get educational information for .NET MAUI?
So there are docs. Like you can go to docs.microsoft.com. I think it's /.net/MAUI. That's where the official MAUI documentation lives. So you'll find content there. That's where I would start you out. And MAUI hasn't shipped yet. MAUI's still in preview. It's expected to ship middle of this year. So as we get closer and closer to that release date, more and more MAUI content will be showing up on the documentation site, on the .NET marketing site. So expect more content to start showing up. There's also a lot of great community content out there already from folks on from Progress and from various other companies that have been talking about MAUI, exploring MAUI in its preview releases. So those are great to look at as well.
Great. Thanks. Perfect. Yes, down there. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, John, our lovely producer, getting all these links for us. Okay, so what'd be really funky is to use Blazor, but rather than rendering HTML, it renders to native components.
Yeah, we experimented with this. We actually have an experimental project out there called the Mobile Blazor Bindings, which is based on Xamarin, which is basically MAUI's precursor, where we use the Razor syntax that Blazor is built on to not only be able to do web UI in a sort of a hybrid approach, where you're rendering to an embedded web view control, essentially, but also we created a bunch of Blazor components that essentially wrap the native UI control. So you could write native UI using Razor syntax as well, which has some nice characteristics, right? It's like one programming model to do both native UI and web UI. Razor has some nice characteristics in terms of just being able to use C# constructs for your rendering logic. So we did look at that. That is not currently slated to ship with the initial MAUI release. We've been discussing a lot, whether is that the right programming model? What is the modern programming model for doing native UI that we want to push with MAUI? For right now, you've got XAML for native UI, and if you want to do web UI, we'll give you Blazor, which is based off of Razor. That's what we're currently going with, but we have had that thought as well, and feel free to reach out to us on GitHub to share your thoughts and ideas on what you think would be best there.
Excellent there. Are there any plans to come up with something that is similar to a server-side rendered Next.js app? Blazor server is close, but the WebSocket thing makes it difficult for users with a poor internet connection.
I guess that's me again. I'll try. So I'm not a Next.js expert. From what I understand about Next.js is it's largely a static site generation based technology. So anyway, anyone on the call that knows better than me can correct me on that. But that's what I understand. So at build time, you're generating out all the static content for the site. Blazor and ASP.NET Core in general are not really of that nature of static site generators. They have a lot more logic around doing, generating the HTML at runtime. Like MVC and Razor pages, you get an HTTP request, and then they run some .NET code to generate the HTML response. In Blazor, it's client-side rendering, where at runtime generating client-side UI, either in the user's browser or by funneling DOM updates down to the browser through a SignalR connection. Now, a Blazor WebAssembly app in particular is just a bunch of static files. So you can deploy it as a static site, and you don't need any SignalR connection to maintain the user's interactive experience. You can host it on a GitHub page or on Azure Static Web Apps and get really low cogs for your server load. There are some community projects that also have looked at taking Blazor components and using them for static site generation, similar to from what I understand, Next.js and Hugo and all these other static site generators do. So I would encourage you to go look at those if that pattern is interesting to you. We don't currently have any plans to bring that into the framework as a first-class feature, but we're listening. It is possible to do today, just not something that's built in.
VS 2022 is not supporting the Report Viewer Designer extension. Do you know when that will be available?
So again, thank you very much for the feedback. I'll definitely take it to the team. We will see how important, like what is the usage of this designer, and hopefully eventually we'll get it done. But if we're talking about WinForms, we have very urgent tasks that we absolutely have to finish first related to the designer itself. And once we are done with that, then we will be working on additional features such as report designer.
Great. Yes. So always taking the feedback. We really, really appreciate it. Feel free to ask your questions now. We have a couple more minutes, but I'm not sure I'm seeing too many come through.
I'll say that, as Olia was saying, it's really important for as customers to enable the telemetry options in .NET and Visual Studio, because that really gives feedback to Microsoft about what features are being used and what are people trying to load and then crashes and doesn't work, and that really feeds into where priorities go. So
Yeah, agreed there.
For reporting services, I think this is related, but like even for web applications, we get this question also sometimes for ASP.NET Core. The Power BI folks published a blog post fairly recently talking about how you can, as an alternative, integrate Power BI services into your application. So that may be an alternative, and maybe we can share the link to that. I'll put it in the chat here.
Yeah, we'll get the resources, all the resources that we talked about in this event and more. We're going to link them shortly. There we go, right down there. So aka.ms/modernization/resources. You can find all the links we chatted about, a few more, all the links to documentation right there. I just want to thank you all so much for taking the time to be a part of this. This has been a month-long work in progress with a lot of amazing things that we've been able to talk about here, and a lot more things that are in the roadmap, and as well as feedback we've taken to put in the future roadmaps. So thank you. Thanks everyone who was able to join us online. This was recorded and will be uploaded to Learn TV. Thanks everybody.
Thanks.